So as Tony says, hot off the press, we just wrapped up probably the first week of last week we wrapped up the data collection for this and ran the numbers and did the analysis. So quick turnaround for you guys, but we'll jump right into it. This is the scariest slide on here, just to let you know, and it has to do with sample design. What we did was we took the 2013 deer hunting applications. We identified over 68,000 unique applicants. Below that, you'll see the seasons that we were looking at, and really what I want to call to your attention just for later reference are these bottom three here: landowner preference, landowner owned land, and landowner free antler list. These are what, as I go through, I'll refer to as landowner specific license types. The rest of these are lumped into the non-landowner specific. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have landowners who held one of these licenses. It's just not specific to a landowner type, just for clarification. So looking at the 68,675 applicants, 78% of those were applications for non-landowner specific licenses, 22% for landowner specific. Because we wanted to look at both of these groups, we needed to oversample our landowner specific because they represent a proportionally smaller group. So what we did is referred to as a disproportionate stratified random sample. It just means that we sampled by these two groups, landowner specific, non-landowner specific, and we did it in a way that doesn't equal 78%, 22%. We did it 50-50. We took a sample of 6,000 randomly selected, and within that it was 3,000 from the non-landowner specific, 3,000 for landowner specific. So then, and I'll explain to you how I deal with that later when we get into the actual numbers. This is pretty much typical for what we do on all our surveys. We did mixed mode, online and mail. Our online, we had 87% of our folks we had email for. And then, so we tried to reach them with asking them to do the survey online first. If they didn't respond, or those we didn't have emails for, we then followed up with mailing a copy of the survey to them. This modified tailored design is just our standard mailing procedure with multiple contacts. We use this also for emails, multiple email contacts, multiple mail contacts. This is how we get to these really high response rates that we do have. And then we had a 13 question survey. So of our 6,000 sample, when we adjust for things like undeliverables, bad addresses, deceased, email addresses in the proper form, whatever, we come up with an adjusted sample size of just over 5,800. We received 4,163 responses for approximately a 71% response rate. Below that just gives you the breakdown. It was essentially 50-50 split between landowner specific tags and non-landowner specific. So this bottom thing that indicates weight, this is how I deal with the fact that we oversampled one group within the population. Once we combine data, all the data together to say this is what our deer hunters said about this, there's a weighting factor that adjusts it so that people represent the correct proportion that they would be found in the population, so that we're not oversampling when we do that. So on to the good stuff here. One of the first things we asked was what seasons individuals applied for in a typical year. They could answer multiple seasons, so if you did the quick math, you'd see this adds up to about 187%, and that's why, because they are applying for more than one season in a typical year. But 67% are indicated they typically apply for East River deer, another 41% indicated West River deer, and then archery comes in at about a third of our deer hunters in a typical year, so they apply for archery. Again, keeping in mind that someone could be in East River deer, West River archery, or any combination thereof. We also asked to try to get it down to be more specific is, okay, so what's your most preferred deer hunt? 49% of our hunters indicated that East River deer, including the special buck season, is their most preferred deer hunt. 24% for West River, and then it drops down to 13% in archery and 11 in Black Hills, and it tapers off. So here, a hunter could only select one, so not barring the 0.5% rounding error here, it does add up to 100%. And so, whoops. So the majority of folks are falling into our major firearm season here, East River, West River, as their most preferred. We also asked individuals how often they expected to be successful in drawing their most preferred deer license. 57% indicated every year, and another 35% said at least once every 2 years. So the majority of folks expect to be successful at least once every 2 years. So I got to thinking, well, we have landowners mixed in here, and I wanted to see how that played out on this expectation. So I split out our landowner and non-landowner. And I got down here, it's kind of in small type. So landowners here are defined. We asked a question as whether or not individuals qualified for landowner preference, meaning they're a resident, they own or operate at least 160 acres farm or ranch land for agricultural purposes. If they indicated yes, they are classified as a landowner on this. If they indicated no, they're a non-landowner. The reason I use this is this accounts for landowners who held non-landowner specific tags in the year. So it's a little bit cleaner. So looking at that, regardless of the category, the hash lines are landowners, the solid bars are your non-landowners. Regardless, 90% of each group expect to be successful at least once every 2 years. But you can see that the landowner group, 3/4 of them are expecting every year to be successful. And that, you know, given how the landowner tags work, made sense to me anyways. We asked folks how fair or unfair they felt the current allocation of buck deer licenses was. And you've got just over, it looks like 51% felt it was fair or very fair. Only 27% felt it was unfair or very unfair. About a quarter we're in the neither nor category. We also asked support or opposition for keeping the current allocation system of buck deer license. Similarly, you've got 41% who support or strongly support it, 27% some level of opposition, and about a third were kind of on the fence, neither opposed nor supporting it. One of the questions we asked, and because it was really long, I couldn't get it all up here, but I'll read the question quickly. We explained how the preference points, how chances with each additional preference point are increased. Do you think this process should be modified so greater weight is placed on applicants who have more preference points, increasing their chances of drawing a license and decreasing the chances of applicants with fewer preference points? And this was a simple yes, no, not sure question. 54% of folks said yes, that they felt that greater weight should be placed on applicants who have more preference points. A quarter said no, and the remaining 21% were unsure. Not surprisingly, we've asked this question in previous years on previous surveys, and so this was a similar result. The majority, 71%, if my math is right, supported or strongly supported a system that increased residents' hunters' chances of drawing their preferred deer license. 14% were opposed to that for some reason or another, and another 14% were somewhat neutral. But when you start getting into the, okay, well, what do you think about this option that could potentially get us to that point of increasing your chances of drawing? This first one had to do with if we had simultaneous drawings for the firearm deer seasons, and hunters could only choose one season in that first drawing, and these are reflective of the alternatives that Tony and Tom spoke with you. I believe it was either August or June or something like that, back in the summer. And really, you get on here and you pretty much see a flat line across. It's not equal distribution across all categories, but it's pretty close. 39% have some level of support for this. 36% have some level of opposition, and about a quarter are on the fence. when we look at the same thing, but you could choose 2 seasons in your first drawing, not much difference. Still about 37% support, 30 are neutral, and another 34% some level of opposition for it. So again, this is, as far as statistical distributions, this is pretty close to flat. We also asked on the survey about the support or opposition for establishing a quota for a license quota on archery buck deer licenses. Again, similar to the other 2 options, fairly evenly distributed across through here. 25%, so about a quarter, supported it. Just under a quarter were neutral, and the remaining looks like 41% were opposed to some extent. I also thought about this one, similar to how we broke out the landowner. I thought, okay, well, we've got archery deer hunters in here and non-archery deer hunters, so is there going to be a difference? The way archery hunter is defined in this instance, if they indicated on that first question we talked about, the seasons you apply for in a typical year, if archery was one of those seasons, they're in this archery hunter category. If it was not indicated in a typical year, then they're a non-archer for this purpose. And you can definitely see there's some difference. The hashed line is the archery deer hunter. The solid is your non-archery deer hunter. And 59% of your archery deer hunters strongly oppose a license quota. Another 22% oppose it. Then if you come over here, you get, it's not as dramatic as 59% strongly opposing, but you get, looks like 46% of our non-archery hunters support or strongly support, so only 18% strongly support it. And you get your fence riders here, you're neither oppose nor support. 31% of those are of the non-archery deer hunters are there, and only 10% of your archery deer hunters. So there is a difference there. Kind of would expect to see. One of the things we asked, a question about support or opposition for keeping archery as a guaranteed license, but you'd have to give up your first draw eligibility in a firearm season. Similar to our simultaneous drawing questions and the quota question, you see a pretty level distribution across there. 39% some amount of support, 14% neutral, and looks like 47% opposition of some sort. When you look at that, again, breaking it out, the archery deer hunters and the non-archery deer hunters, it's similar to the license quota question, where you have 62% of your archery deer hunters strongly opposed to this, but you do gain more support on the non-archery deer hunter side with about 49%. So then finally, we wrapped up the survey with asking some questions about landowner preference. We gave folks a blurb that explained kind of how it works, and then we asked them how would they rate the current proportion, so that 50% of licenses in a unit that are allocated toward landowner preference. 43% of our deer hunters indicated it was just about right, and 47% said too many. And similar to previous questions, I split out landowners from non-landowners here to see if that would tell us a different story of what's going on. Here you still see 62% of landowners felt it was just about right, 35% of non-landowners, and then over here on the too many category side, you get 62% of non-landowners felt this is too many. And then on the too few side, you end up with 28% of landowners feeling that it was too few. So it's kind of the story behind the combined data when you look at it that way. We also asked about the minimum acreage requirements. So that 160 acres, was that too few, just about right, or too many? 60% of deer hunters indicated it was just about right. You've got 26% on the too few side of things, and another 14% on the far too many, or not far, slightly too many or far too many. Broke that out by landowner and non-landowner as well. This one is less, there's less variation here. Pretty much the majority of both groups land in that just about right category.
The landowner preference once takes away from the regular season.
So with that,
Yes,
It's part of that
it's
allotment
part of that allotment.
versus landowner land that doesn't mess that up.
Right.
The way we do it, and the way we should do it.
well, I'll let, my backup come up here.
What? You need to get more advocacy going in these surveys.
Obviously, that's the question. Where do we go from here? This is a key part of what we wanted to find out is getting this additional information to see what our hunters think. And lo and behold, they think that they'd sure like to have a way to get a license more often. But the way we proposed it doesn't seem to be a way that they think is a way to get there. So that leaves us in a kind of a quandary of going back to the drawing board and trying to figure out if there might be another alternative, or if it's maybe just they're not ready for this alternative right now. There were some other elements I think that you saw in there that we could make some adjustments on. The one about if you have more preference or more lottery points, that you have an elevated chance of drawing a license. So we've had some discussions about implementing a system maybe in somewhat similar to what we do for our elk drawings right now, a tiered system where if you accumulate more preference points, your chances of drawing a license are elevated. That's something that we will have some time to discuss. The key component on a decision point on the information that we have right now was that we will be bringing you a recommendation for the special buck hunting season in January. And if we were interested, or if you were interested in implementing a different system of allocation similar to what we talked about, where you had to pick your seasons and you were restricted in the number of those seasons that you could apply for, that it was important to have that in place when we brought to you the special buck season. Like I said, the data, the responses we got don't seem to support going in that direction at this time. So if we set that alternative aside, we do have some more time to work on these other elements of maybe a modified drawing system to help elevate some of those folks' opportunities that have a little bit more preference points and don't seem to draw licenses or are unlucky in those drawings. But we're interested in your feedback on what you saw today with the presentation and what you think might be a path to go forward.
I think we could do it based upon height. If you're 5'11" or over, you get one choice.
I'm with you.
If you're 5'10" or under, you can have as many as 3. That makes up for all the bullying that you and I took when we were in elementary school by those great big dudes. Okay?
Question.
Any other valid questions or concerns?
Hope mine is. Thank you, Tony or Cindy. This, I took it was a 2013. So we're in the midst of the 2014. Do you think there would be, just in what you're hearing today, any difference, much difference in that survey if you'd have it done for the 2014 season? I mean, I've heard good results and I've heard poor results on hunting deer this season.
I believe we did draw the pool from the 2014 applicants.
13.
Oh, it was 13. I apologize. So the question then is, there was less number of hunters that we drew the pool from, possibly, and that's something we even talked about at our meeting when we previewed this with Cindy a couple days ago. Is, we're just now shifting toward this new age of deer license allocation or deer hunting opportunity. For the first time that I can remember in the history that I've been with this department, we sold every limited allocation deer license that we allocated. We sold them all this year for the first time that I can remember. And that's that new age that we're getting into now, elevated interest and currently populations of deer that are maybe less than meeting the demand. And I think you ask a very valid question, that we don't necessarily abandon this idea in its entirety, but maybe we put it on the shelf for a little while to see if it needs to ripen a little bit before we would move towards implementation.
Mr. Chairman? In my area this year with the lesser deer numbers and we had less tags, the different hunters that talked to me were very willing to forego hunting this year, knowing that, you know, half of our people or a lot of people didn't get to hunt, with the idea that it's going to help bring the numbers back and their opportunities are going to come back. They're seeing that more as a way to get the numbers up than they are at seeing changing the whole system. You know, they're this year, they're quite used to getting a tag every year or every year or two in my area, and this year they knew that they wouldn't, but they're hoping that that's a good help to bring the population back up so that they again can. And that's not the landowner-owned land people, that's the regular people that are drawing the tags.
Thanks, Kathy. Other comments?
Last night, how many deer do we harvest in South Dakota every year, roughly?
Chad, Andy, can you help me out on that?
There's about 50,000 last year. We
Fi-
reached out to close to 90,000 about 5 years ago.
Yeah,
50, he said?
50-ish, yeah, the last couple of years.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Barry.
I haven't hunted deer for several years now. I used to, but so I'm a little lost in the process. But as a landowner, I applied for a license. My name goes in with the non-landowners as well. Is that correct? Am I correct on this now?
Yeah,
Or lead me through the process here as a landowner.
there are two different types of licenses that we need to refer to here. First, the standard license that are allocated for the entire hunting unit, and then the landowner-specific licenses, which you know well because you worked on that statute when you were in the state legislature. The way the system works right now is 50% of the licenses allocated within a hunting unit are set aside for people that qualify for landowner preference. 50% are set on the other side for people that don't qualify. So you get into a drawing first, and if you're unsuccessful in that drawing, which doesn't happen in West River, I think there may be a couple landowners in south central South Dakota that may be unsuccessful, but pretty much every landowner in western South Dakota that wants one of those unit-wide licenses gets one.
So, and then as a landowner, there are two possibilities. You can either hunt just your own land, or you can, with landowner preference, you can hunt your land or anything in that unit. Is that?
That is correct. Yeah, the different licenses, the landowner or the landowner preference license is your preference for that 50% of the general allocation. That's valid for the entire unit. Landowners are all guaranteed a license that's valid for hunting their own property. Typically, I think there's a fair number of landowners that apply for the unit-wide license, and then if they're unsuccessful, maybe purchase that license that's valid for their own property. However, I think we saw in the results that there were a fair number of landowners that don't even apply for the unit-wide license. They just go ahead and get the one that's valid for their own land because they know that's all they're going to hunt anyway.
Yeah. So I guess my point is there, and I think that's the way, you know, a vast majority of landowners are, is that they feel that they deserve to be able to hunt their own land. And most of them, I think that's all they want to hunt is their own land. And I I guess, is there any way to streamline that to where a guy that just wants to hunt his own land can just bypass the drawing or shortcut that drawing process to where they aren't in a, taking somebody's place in a drawing when all they want is their own privilege to hunt their own land? Is that am I close on anything there?
I think I understand where you're going with this. And I think to a certain extent it happens right now because there is, in addition to being a different allocation, there's a difference in fee. And that's probably not a big deal to some, maybe a bigger deal to others, but essentially it's a half-price license. The fee for the license to hunt your own land is half. It doesn't work out that way in the end because you add the surcharge that's imposed by state statute, so it doesn't end up, it's 50% of the starting number, and then you add the $6 surcharge to it.
Oh.
But still, essentially half-price license, so that motivates some. So would you believe that the way to do that would be to get that license offered earlier, before the drawings, or?
Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking that, if landowner is only after a license for his own land, that you could get him out of that competition with other hunters that are trying to get drawn for.
I might say something that's not accurate here, but it seems like one of the ways you could get to that point would be, if I understand the way the system works today, as a landowner, you apply for the draw, and 50% of those licenses are held aside for landowners in that first draw. And you, I think, could lower that percentage that's held for landowners that then would be valid for the entire unit as opposed to the own land only license. So you could get sort of directly to making more available for the broader pool by dealing with the percentage of licenses that are held in reserve initially for landowners to apply for. And that would be valid in the whole unit. So that would get to, I think, what you're talking about, and it would probably, with time, I'm not saying you should do this, but with time, landowners would figure out that, we don't need to bother, especially those folks that are only going to hunt their own land anyway.
Yeah.
Don't need to bother applying because the number of licenses that are held in reserve are less than they used to be, and these other ones are available for them. I think that's accurate.
It seems like it throws competition in there where maybe there don't need to be competition for I don't know.
Yeah, in the portion of the state where that would have its greatest effect would be in eastern South Dakota, because right now in western South Dakota, even if you lowered the proportion of licenses that went into the landowner pool, you wouldn't change the drawing at all because there are fewer landowners that are applying for those. So it would have an impact over in the eastern part of the state, certainly, though.
Because I think we're, in visiting with landowners where they, you get their hair standing up on their neck is when you threaten that ability for them to get a license to hunt on their own land. I mean, that's very sacred.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we want to screw with that too much, but if there's some way to get them out of that drawing process or whatever, so it doesn't take away from other people that are trying to draw at the same time. Might be some possibilities to work something there. But.
Right. We could sure try to flesh that out some more. Now, you did notice that we asked that question, is 50% the right amount? And I think it was pretty strong in the response that people thought, yeah, that's about the right amount.
I would comment on that too. personally, landowner-owned land works good for the people that I'm closest to, but I do know many landowners that like the unit-wide one, and I think, you know, you'd have to go carefully with changes on that to get their opinions on it. But there's such a balancing act to get the others the availability to have more opportunities, and then the balancing act of keeping enough bucks in the system to keep building a good herd for the hunting opportunity. So it's such a balance, you know, because some people love to hunt. In my area, you hunt at home, you hunt in our area, but you also like that trip out to the hills when you get that opportunity. And I think for some of them, it would be hard to choose which they'd rather do. But yet, if the numbers stay down, that might have to be the way it works in order to keep a good population. But hopefully the numbers will go back up.
Other
You're doing a pretty
questions?
good job by this.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, the key to any change is trying to find a package that offers some pluses and minuses. I think it'd be difficult to just say we're gonna take something away here without figuring out a way to give something, and that's the key. And I haven't, you know, I've been thinking about that since I saw this information of trying to ffigure out how you could put a package together that has some pluses and minuses that ultimately is a better system for the state. I haven't come up with it yet. I'm sure open to suggestions.
Go ahead, Scott.
The landowner on his own land tag, that number can go above and beyond the allocated number of licenses for that particular unit yet.
That's
It can be
correct.
sold out, but if
Correct.
a landowner applies for his own land, it's an additional license.
It's important to note that those numbers are pretty consistent year to year. So we take that into account when we set the allocation for each of those hunting units, knowing that, you know, what happened last year is going to be pretty similar to what happened this year. So while they don't come out of the total, they do affect the total.
Thank you.
If I might, in that landowner preference is an any deer license too, is it not? It's an any deer.
There are two license alternatives
Yeah.
available to landowner, either single tag, any deer, or a double tag, any plus antlerless.
Yeah. I did that once, and I was just trying to confirm that.
Go ahead.
As Tony, I think, pointed out, you know, one area that there seems to be, well, it's not, there's no maybe consensus in any of this, but where there seemed to be majority interest by respondents was looking at a different weighting system for the preference point deal. And so we're entering into a new game, if you will, with preference points, because you got to buy them now. And so there may be some value, since I used to think I got it for nothing, now I got to pay for it, of looking at that
How many they
weighting
put in?
system, because, you know, it would mean more potentially for folks who are spending the extra $5 to buy a preference point. In that survey in that area seemed to indicate there would be majority interest in having that mean something more than it does today because of our current system.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Would that weighting kind of eliminate, when I hear from guys that this so-and-so is always lucky, he always gets it, and I've waited for so many years, would that
Wouldn't eliminate it, but it would help.
help it? And that's one comment I get when I go to the gas station or whatever.
Yeah, and part of that, there is a little bit of a lack of understanding of how the system works right now, and as much as we try to explain that, sometimes we just don't get that through. But I would tell you that half the time I hear one of those things, I ask for more details, and what they tell me is, well, yeah, that guy had a license last year and he got another one this year, and I had a preference point and I didn't get one. And I said, that's not possible. Something's wrong, because the system is set up right now that if you have a preference point, you get in line first. And we have a drawing for you first before this other guy. That's half the time. The other half the time, it is just poor luck on their part. And how do you? All you can do is sympathize with them.
Yeah, that's what I say. I said, if I could draw, you'd be happy, but it's just luck of the draw.
we'll never probably solve all this, but I kind of hearken to what North Dakota's faced with right now, where there's such a drastic decrease in the overall deer herd, and especially the impacts in western North Dakota from the oil development. Folks are now being faced with the reality that they probably, in some circumstances, may not get a deer license for 4 years. That's what the proposal is up there. And so, we're somewhat, I guess it's all relative, but we're somewhat still in pretty good shape unless we have something significant like what happened in North Dakota. But, the most common thing I think I always get is, well, I'd be willing to just, be able to put in for 3, make 3 choices, and if I get 1 or 2, I'd be happy. In other words, so getting back to what Secretary Vonk said, if you're really looking to trying to appeal to the fact that we have a pretty privileged opportunity in South Dakota historically to be able to hunt deer, we go to a weighted preference system that does have some real significant impact on whether you're successful or not. Or we get to it by limiting the number of licenses that they can apply for, and they make their own choice. I don't know any other way to do that other than those 2 things. And given what Cindy's discovered here, I don't think they know it either. I don't think that the general public has an idea. They just want to be able to have the continued luxury of being able to hunt deer like we always have had. And if you ask them if we can't hunt deer, like, what's your choices? Well, I don't know. Just don't push me in that box. You guys supply more deer for me. So anyway, that's kind of my summation of the.
You bring up a point that I want to make sure we're clear about. We use the term preference point, but really our system is not a preference system.
Straight preference.
It's a weighted lottery.
Yeah.
And we use the term preference point. In other states, preference means preference. And whoever has the most preference points gets the license, and they just go down the line, ding, 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 until they run out of licenses. And then next year, everybody moves up, and they go down the line and get them. That's not the system we operate under in this state. It's a weighted lottery. You increase your chances of drawing, but there are no guarantees. So I just want to make sure. We use the term preference all the time, but it's the true description is weighted lottery.
Yep. Okay. What do you think? You're thinking about going back and doing some more brainstorming at the staff level and visiting and take a look at Cindy's data in more detailed level, and at some point, I guess, I don't know whether we try to put together some type of a work group, or you guys just put your staff heads together and take a look at what recommendations you want to bring back to the commission, and we need to do it probably by this next meeting if we're looking at making some good value decisions on those special buck licenses.
Correct. A different system of a weighted lottery system would not affect special buck, because the way special buck is right now, the current system meets the demand. In other words, if you have a preference point, you will draw a special buck license. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the allocation is sufficient or the current drawing system matches well with special buck allocations of licenses. Are you following me there? If you have a preference point, you're going to draw. That's the system we have right now. Right. So it won't be necessary to implement anything to quote-unquote fix special buck. So we have a little bit more time. The key on bringing the recommendation to you in January along with special buck was if we wanted to implement a system that limited your number of applications that you could put in, right, that we needed to get that in place. Now, if you're in agreement with our perception that that's not ripe, that's not quite right yet, then we have a little bit more time.
Yeah. In other words, what you're saying is, okay, if you get a special buck license, you can't apply for any other licenses, which would open up that, in other words, take those people out of the competition. It's that kind of discussion.
If we were going to do that, we'd want to make sure that that was up front and on the table when you talked about special buck. But again, it doesn't appear like that's a favorable way to go according to the responses that we saw in the survey.
Okay, then I would guess probably at the January meeting, we'll kind of rely on you guys to bring us a set of options, and we'll see what we can come up with. In the meantime, maybe we talk with our folks and see what happens. I think that's the only way to go. you could sit here and try to hammer on this for a long time and still not come up with anything that would be substantial. Gary?
Could I ask, is there anything that we should do in terms of managing this whole system in order to better manage the deer herd and the deer population? Set aside what, we surveyed people now, but is there some change we need to make from a biological standpoint?
I think where that will come into play as we get our harvest data and our normal annual information on where things stand right now, a lot of that will fall right into place with recommendations as we come into the month of May for all the deer seasons, in particular East River, West River seasons, Black Hills deer, where we specifically talk about the license allocation and what types of licenses. That's really where we're going to be talking about the management of the deer, in particular the biological management of it and the herd itself. So I think up to that point in time, I would say no, because that's really the crux of where we can make those adjustments for management of the deer numbers themselves.
The most important step that we can take when it comes to deer management is to identify those units where we want to increase numbers of deer, and in those units decrease the harvest of antlerless deer, which is an action that you've already taken earlier this year. Identifying those places where we want to have growth in the population is to restrict that antlerless deer harvest.
Okay, thank you very much. It's another one of those really easy to solve deals. But
Yeah.
We're going down the right road by having the survey data. Cindy, thank you very much for the effort on this thing.
We will welcome Cindy back up here shortly. She's got another presentation for you, but